John Wayne Gacy, David Berkowitz, Jeffrey Dahmer, serial killers. Probably heard of all of them, probably familiar with some of their crimes. What you may not know is that there may be others like them out there. How can we recognize them? Good evening, my name is Trent Hawks, and I'll be your presenter tonight for the LUT1 task number 2. The topic at hand is serial killers. We're discussing some of the warning signs that may be present in serial killers. We're going to talk about 3 of these warning signs, which include a troubled or unusual childhood environment, social awkwardness or being antisocial, and an unnatural fascination with things like dead animals or fire. In some cases, even the killing of animals or starting of fires. And we're going to explore each of these in further detail. Now, on the topic of troubled childhood environment, one need look no further than John Wayne Gacy, this individual pictured right here. Gacy was born in 1942 and would go on to be known as the Killer Clown. This was based on his appearances as the character Pogo the Clown, a character that he himself devised and appeared at various fundraisers as. He was born in Chicago, Illinois. As a child, he was overweight, he wasn't very athletic, and it was these factors that led to constant belittling from his father, sometimes some undue discipline, other things like that. His father's name was John Samuel Gacy. The elder Gacy was an alcoholic who physically abused his wife and children. Often beaten with a leather belt, John Wayne Gacy was also called names like Sissy, Mama's Boy, Stupid by his father. He would live a childhood fraught with pain and despair, often seeking his father's approval but rarely obtaining it. These factors in his childhood contributed to his subsequent downfall. He attended 4 different high schools, never did actually graduate. He actually left home at the age of 20 after a particularly violent fight with his father. Went to Las Vegas, where he worked in a mortuary for a time before returning to Chicago, which is where he carried out his crimes. On the topic of his crimes, Gacy would later, in confessions, attribute those crimes to an alter ego, Jack, whom experts believed was a personality spawned during the formative years of his life as a result of the abuse he endured. When it comes to social awkwardness or being antisocial, a great example of this is this gentleman pictured right here, Mr. David Berkowitz, more commonly known as the Son of Sam killer. As a child, he was never very popular. It is believed that the reason for this was because of his antisocial behavior. He had a nearly uncontrollable and often violent temper. Led a lonely childhood, didn't fit in with playmates at an early age. Something was already out of kilter with his personality. There were actually a few other factors at work and some other warning signs in David Berkowitz's past. He was born out of wedlock he was fathered by a man that his mother had an affair with. His actual given name was Richard David Falco, and he was actually given up for adoption. Pearl and Nathan Berkowitz, the name of the couple that adopted him, hardware store owners that adopted him before he was a week old. They did talk about his childhood being somewhat troubled. They also talked about the fact that he was a smart boy, but quickly lost interest in learning, developed some infatuation with things like pyromania, which is another warning sign that we'll talk about a little further. And to do that, we'll introduce this third individual here, Jeffrey Dahmer. Jeffrey Dahmer actually lived what most would refer to as a normal childhood. However, as he approached the age of 10, he began to grow withdrawn. This withdrawn state and uncommunicative behavior continued on into his teenage years, and it was around this time that he began kind of going around the neighborhood, riding his bike around the neighborhood, and collecting the carcasses of dead animals. He would bring those home and later dissect them and do various other experiments on them. One particularly gruesome story talks about how he actually put a dog's head on a stake. So we've discussed many examples here of warning signs that may be present in serial killers. And some of their activities may have been stopped had someone, recognized these things, seen the warning signs. And while it's true that not all killers exhibit warning signs, and certainly not every child that may have some of these would go on to become a serial killer, it is important that we give credence to those deemed most at risk, especially as parents. If any of these warning signs were present in our children, it would be important that maybe we have them speak to an expert. It may turn out to be nothing, but there's a very good chance that that was the same feelings for the parents of these individuals we spoke about tonight. With the time we have remaining, I'd like to open it up to some questions, if anybody has some. Yes, please go ahead.
Things like fire may simply just be fascinating to some people. Why would this be a warning sign?
That's a very good question. As far as a fascination or a curiosity or interest in something like that wouldn't necessarily be considered a warning sign until it becomes unnatural or certainly unhealthy. Once it evolves more into an obsession than simply a curiosity, that's when one would maybe consider that to be a concern. Anybody else? Yes, you.
Can you list other potential warning signs or things to look for if one or more of the ones given is present in an individual?
Okay, sure. Another warning sign that most experts agree on would be persistent bedwetting in individuals over the age of 5.